So why am I doubting when you prove that you'd fight for me? You've walked me through fires, pulled me from flames. If you're in this with me, I won't be afraid. When the smoke billows higher, oh, and higher, and it feels like I can barely breathe.
Good evening, church. You'll stand with us. Open up the heavens and sing that together. We waited for this day. We gathered in your name, calling out to you. Your glory like a fire, awakening desire will burn our hearts with you. You're the reason we're here. You're the reason we're singing. Open up the heavens, we want to see you. Open up the floodgates, a mighty river flowing from your heart, filling every part of our prayer. Your presence in this place, your glory on our face. We look into the sky, descending like a cloud. You're standing with us now, Lord, unveil our eyes. You're the reason we're here. You're the reason we're singing. Open up the heavens, we want to see you. Open up the floodgates, a mighty river flowing from your heart, filling every part of our prayer. Open up the heavens, we want to see you. Open up the floodgates, a mighty river flowing from your heart, filling every part of our prayer. Show us your glory. Show us your power. Show us your glory, Lord. Sing that out. Show us your glory. Show us your power. Show us your glory, Lord. We want to see you. Open up the floodgates, a mighty river flowing from your heart, filling every part of our praise. Open up the heavens, we want to see you. Open up the floodgates, a mighty river flowing from your heart, filling every part of our praise. I meant to say this last week, but it's really weird. Let's sing this with us. As morning dawns and evening fades, you inspire songs of praise that rise from earth to touch your heart and glorify your name. Your name is a strong and mighty tower. Your name is a shelter like no other. Your name, let the nations sing it loud, 'cause nothing has the power to stay but your name. Jesus, in your name we pray. Come and fill our hearts today. Lord, give us strength to live. nations singing louder, 'cause nothing has the power to save. Your name is a strong and mighty tower. Your name is a shelter like no other. Your name, let the nations sing it louder, 'cause nothing has the power to save. Your name. Amen. You can be seated.
It's unlike mine. This was Scotty's old pack, and it's different than mine. So, good. All right. If you've got your scripture pamphlet from last week, just tell the guys that you're good to go. And if you'll keep these that you get tonight and keep them until next Wednesday, that would be fantastic as well. That would just help us save on printing more and more of these. So, fantastic. Y'all, thanks for joining us for worship. Oh, Sarita, that I loved it all, but the second song is one of my favorites. So that's a great one. But they're both good. So, and thanks you guys for joining us online. They didn't get to worship with us online; they couldn't hear it. But now we're good to go. So I was getting texts. That's why I was texting you. I got texts from multiple people saying this. There's no sound online. But you got it? We got sound back here, so I don't know. Okay. Well, I hope they get it. I hope they're getting this online. Fantastic. I was able to. By the way, who enjoyed the food tonight? Anybody? A handful of us. Fantastic. So I wanted to mix it up with some boiled shrimp and cocktail, and we've had the bread before. We've had that delicious cheddar bay biscuits from Red Lobster and some salad. And so thanks for enjoying that. And so next week I got a big, huge announcement. I just learned tonight from the source. From Jennifer. Next week, we won't be in the foyer for our food and fellowship. We will be in the fellowship hall for our food and fellowship next week. So the caveat is that, yes, it's good. I'm seeing a lot of you with big smiles. We'll be there next week. Now, the kitchen's not done, so we'll have that part roped off. We still got things coming in. There's more work to be done in that kitchen area, but the fellowship hall itself will have tables and more room in there, so tables and chairs, and instead of us packing it out in here. And so I'll put some signs out here to remind folks that we'll be in the fellowship hall from 6 to 6:30. I don't know what the food will be, but we'll make it good since we're going to be in the fellowship hall next week. So excited about that. I'm excited that earlier today I got to take a check for $2,766 over to the Decatur Baptist Children's Home that was raised by our kids and their families, and many of us, in our VBS endeavor just a few weeks ago. And so they so appreciated it. What a pleasant surprise for them, just to get about $3,000 unexpected nearly. And I took some other items that some of you folks have given that we were able to give them. So I took gifts to go along with the check, and I talked about how we're going to engage with them hopefully in the coming months, minister to them in different ways. And we also give to them yearly as you tithe. A portion of that goes to the state and to the North American Mission Board, and they get percentages from both of those. And so we give in that way too. So it's some great stuff going on at the Decatur Baptist Children's Home this Sunday. Lastly, this Sunday, 5:45 p.m. If you'll join us just right down the road. I'll remind you again Sunday morning. But if you'll join us down the road at the Priceville High School, that's our assigned school. We signed up to, and we've done this every year. I got to do it early last year, early when I was here. And so we went to another place, and we're at Priceville High School this Sunday to pray for back to school season coming around. Pray for our students, our teachers, our administrators, and families and homeschool and all that. Just pray that God will begin to bless. And we've got a number of students and we got a number of teachers and administrators even in our church family. So we're going to show up there, and so you can join us at 5:45 just for a few minutes, probably like 40 minutes, and we'll get together and get a picture, and we'll send that to the campus and let them know that we showed up and we prayed. We're going to sign. If you show up, we'll sign a little poster that we give them, and tell them that we're here for them, that we love them, and that we're praying for them. More so than just that one occasion, we're going to be in prayer for them all year round, all school year round. So please do that and join us. And then, one last thing in my little scratch notes here. Last Sunday, just a few days ago, at 2 p.m., it was a super hot day, and I sat here and I hit that volleyball to you, Sarita, Sunday, and so many of y'all came out. 37 people. Good grief. 37 people showed up, and that's with a ton of folks who were out of town who said, "Oh, we love volleyball. We can't come." They were out of town, or had other things going on. But we had 37 of you show up, and so we were able to. Not everybody played. Some were just some great cheerleaders. But we had like 4 teams of 6, and we had a tournament. I was on the losing end every single time. So my team, what was our name? My team was, I can't even remember the names now. The Ice team, they called themselves Ice, they won. We were the spring champions, that's right. From Cave Springer, somebody named us the spring champions. And then our remedy was we can only excel in springtime. So in the springtime, when it's cooler outside, we can do some more stuff. But the Turnbees, that's an easy one. And then your teammate there, Amy Quimby's right in front of you, Turney family. And so it was the Turneys and Amy on a team of 6. And they dominated, but they didn't win. You didn't take off the ice. So the ice crushed it. How about that, right? So it was fun. We're going to do that again. We're going to do some more volleyball. And later, how about this? We get a couple of volleyball courts in the back. I know you've had them before. You had a court back there. Let's get a court or 2, nice sand courts in the back. Since Jeff Clark made that one up the road so perfectly. Did y'all know that we were playing on a court that one of our own members had made? He did a lot of the work at the North Park there. And so I'll be talking to Jeff, and maybe he can lend some of his expertise or know-how, or get some others to help us build some courts here at the church and do that down the road. I can't wait to do it. There's been talk of sharks by our folks lately since we've been in this shark series, or since this is the second week of the series. Somebody said to me last week, and I can't remember who it is. I promise I can't remember, but it was somebody who said, "Well, Pastor, I'm not afraid of sharks. I just don't get in the water." That was their remedy. I mean, the sharks aren't going to bother them. They're not going to get in the water. Problem solved. I guess it could be said, somebody could equally say, "I'm not afraid of flying. I just don't get near planes." I mean, I guess that's an easy one, right? But for those who don't get near sharks, you could still be scared of sharks. Who has seen the movie Sharknado? Oh, I was hoping nobody would raise their hand because I feel so sorry for you. That movie, I know, there's 5 of them. 2013, that movie, I saw the trailers out there, and I'm like, that movie is going to be the dumbest movie ever. I would never watch that movie. Since it's weird, Jim, to have these sharks up here. I'm talking about sharks. I'm like, you know what? It was streaming on Prime Video. For a little fee. I spent $3. I wasted $3 a couple of nights ago to watch Sharknado. I kid you not, in the first 15 seconds, I knew it was the biggest waste. 15 seconds, I'm like, this is horrible. I didn't finish it. That's how bad it was. And I was thinking, how do they have 5 of them? Sharknado 1 through 5, just unbelievably bad. The premise, though, you can still be scared of sharks because can you imagine a tornado? That's what I'm deathly afraid of. I can't stand the thought of tornadoes, and here I am in Alabama, right? So tornadoes, but can you imagine tornadoes picking up live sharks and flinging them around? It's not like the sharks die since they're not in the water. At least if you watch the movie, they don't die. They just grab you. They're just just crazy premise. But that premise came to fruition in a smaller way before the movies ever started. It wasn't a tornado. It was a shark tank that busted in a China shopping center in 2012. And then Sharknado, the first of 5 disasters, came about in 2013. But I saw footage, and I thought about bringing it into you here, but you can watch it on your own time, Google it. But there are multiple angles of footage from this huge so people are just walking with their kids, get the kids in the hand, they're walking shopping, this big tank that's just right beside them. All of a sudden, it just unleashes, and all these sharks just are all over the place. And people got soaked, the ones that were nearest to the tank when it busted, and you can look at it from different angles. I mean, the real deal, no jokes here. But the sharks, unlike the movie Sharknado would tell you, the sharks did nothing. They didn't move around, or they're certainly not trying to bite anybody. I think they all died, sadly. But it was it's still scary. I would have hated to be in that situation, just walking through a mall and there's sharks right at your ankle and water everywhere, right? So I guess staying away from the ocean doesn't necessarily solve your shark tank problem. No matter how far away we stay from water, we still have to deal with human sharks, and that's what we're talking about in this series. Human sharks are mean and evil and devious and self-promoting people. They're everywhere. Some of us know some. We've been talking about Haman. We're going to go back to that in just a second. Some of us know some sharks, and here's one. Check this out. Each one of us was one. Prior to putting our trust in Christ, each one of us was as selfish, sinful, self-serving, and sometimes some of us were just downright devious before placing our trust in Christ. And there's been, hopefully, a radical change, a radical shift as we continue to honor Him and grow in Him, and He challenges us. But some of us still may deal with shark tendencies. All of us, I would say, have selfishness that wants to arise in us, and that's why the Bible tells us to fight it. May God help us to go shark hunting in our own lives and to kill every ounce of pride and selfishness within us. That's why Paul said it a couple of times. He said, assassinate that which is within you that doesn't belong. And pride and selfishness is the utmost that I and all of us must continue to endeavor to get rid of all life long. So we're talking about sharks, but meanwhile, let's always, all of us, deal with that lingering shark pride that exists within us, and let's continue to kill it. Last week we started looking at sharks of the Bible. We began tracking a magnificent shark, and it's magnificent. It was magnificent because that was his name in Hebrew, right? Haman. And so if you'll grab your pamphlets that we had distributed, and remember to keep those, hold on to those. Last week we began tracking a magnificent shark, Haman. He was full of pride. He craved honor and power. He wanted to annihilate the whole race of Jews because there was some family history that wasn't, to his pleasing. Obviously, there'd been history of the Amalekites and King Agag, whom he was a descendant of. These folks had come against God's people and had lost every single time. Ultimately, as they fought it out many times throughout history, God's people would prevail. And so he was also upset, this shark, this magnificent Haman, was upset that this guy Mordecai, who was also Jewish, no surprise to Haman because he hates them all anyhow, and that this Jewish fella, as we looked at last week, Mordecai, who means little man, he was a humble man, little man, but he was also served that name well. He was humble, as we should all strive to be, and he refused, nevertheless, to bow to the second in command, to second to the king, the prime minister, if you will. He didn't want to bow to Haman, and so Haman just got furious about that. And so with the king's authority, he tricked, you could say, snowed the king, influenced the king, his only superior, Haman did, to give him authority. And with the king's authority, wearing the king's signet ring, he devised a murderous plan. And this is just a little rehash of what we looked at last week. And so his plan he put into motion. It was to murder and just genocide. He's talking about murdering all Jews at the capital and all Jerusalem and everywhere that the Persian king Xerxes or Ahasuerus was in control. They were going to murder all Jews. So he wasn't content with maybe just murdering Mordecai at that time. He wanted to take down Mordecai and all Jews. And so Esther, this is where we left off last week, Esther has an opportunity to seize the day in her position as queen. And she's got an opportunity to follow God's leading to rescue her people from destruction. That's where we're going to pick it up in chapter 5. Esther prepares a banquet. So if you'll look with me there, chapter 5, verse 1 of that pamphlet there. On the third day, now this was after fasting and seeking God for the 3 days. So it's technically about 48 hours, and they had 2 nights worth of fasting. But in that third day of the fast, on the third day, because Esther, you remember, she called the women that attended her and called Mordecai and her family and other Jews to fast with her. On the third day of the fast, Esther put on her royal robes. Now these were no doubt beautiful garments. Probably they accentuated her own beauty. We know, if you read the first 2 chapters, she was beautiful. That's why the king now has her as his queen, right? And so she's going to wear her royal garments that do 2 things. 1, accentuate her beauty. Number 2, remind the viewers, and in this case she's going to go before the king, that she is the queen. Hey, I'm your wife. They haven't seen each other in more than 30 days. He hasn't called her. She's going to risk her life, you remember, to go in before him. And so she's going to wear her garments to say to the king, hey, I'm the queen, I'm your wife, I'm not just your average Joe trying to show up and to solicit your favor, to solicit your ear. So she puts on her royal robes and she stood in the inner court of the king's palace. She goes into the inner court. She stands where she does not belong. This is illegal. In her day, as we talked about last week, this was against the law. Civil disobedience for purposes of doing what was right or necessary is what she chose to do in this moment. She did the illegal. Esther was taking a huge risk. Her life was on the line. Make no bones about it. It was said that if you come before the king without him beckoning you forward, without him calling for you, summoning you, your life is on the line unless he graciously holds out his royal, golden scepter toward you, then he gives you grace in that moment. And so this is a life or death situation. She's standing where she doesn't belong, where it's illegal, but she had decided that the risk was worth it. No doubt she was fearful. Can you imagine? She was fearful because she's fearful in the words she told to her cousin who was like her father, Mordecai, earlier, like we talked about last week. She says, oh, my life will be on the line. He may kill me. I've not even seen the man for 30 days. And so she was fearful, but I hope you know that you can be fearful and brave. Please know that God calls us to be brave. Doesn't mean we don't have fear. Doesn't mean Esther wasn't just full of fear. Bravery means you do what's right in the face of fear. It means that even in the face of danger and pain, you're willing to do what is incumbent upon you, what God calls you to do in this circumstance. Esther was going to stand up to her fear. And so it was an audacious move that she made. And would we be able to make it? Would we be able to have that bravery? So I like what Corrie ten Boom, who died, I think, in the 80s, but she was one who had rescued many folks from in Germany from the Nazi camps, and she got found out and went to the Nazi camp, and she was rescued, but she was there thinking that she would die there, right? If you know the Corrie ten Boom story. And so she recounts this story. She told her dad when she's a little 7 or 8-year-old girl, she's like, if I'm ever called on the carpet for Christ, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. I don't know if I'm going to be brave enough. I don't know if I'm going to have, if I can overcome my fear and do what's right, what Christ wants me to do if my life is on the line. She's like, I just don't know if I can do it. And her dad said to her, he gave her some analogy that said that when he takes her to a ball game, I believe it was. It's like, when I take you to a ball game, Corey, and I buy your ticket, when do I give you the ticket? Even though I've bought it a month out, do I give it to you then? She's like, no, because I might lose it. He's like, when do I give it to you? She's like, well, you give it to me as we're about to go in. You give it to me when I need to hand it over to the person taking the tickets. He's like, well, I believe God does that. That right now, any one of us may feel like we don't have the courage necessary if we were to face a trying moment like that. But in those moments, in God's Scripture, the New Testament even tells us this, in those trying moments when our life is on the line at times, God provides courage when it's needed, that we do the right thing. And He definitely provided it for Esther. Esther, as fearful as she was, had the courage to face that fear and to face death. And so she was respectfully disobedient to the law. Notice that she didn't flamboyantly trot into the court and arrogantly demand, oh, king, listen to your wife. Listen to the queen talk. Even though it's illegal for me to be here, that doesn't matter. You're going to listen to me. She didn't arrogantly and flamboyantly and pompously skirt the law. She did break the law. But she did so, I believe, in a respectful manner. She stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's quarters while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. Look at verse 2. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. And he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So the king quickly forgave Esther. Maybe he had forgotten how beautiful she was in the past 30 days of not having seen her. It's not like he could pull out his phone and look at pictures. It's not like he saw her posting some things on Facebook. It's not like he saw her, throughout the day. He hadn't seen her in 30 plus days. And so this beauty wearing her queen's garment shows up before him, and he extends the golden scepter. And not only did he forgive her quickly, but maybe it was because he was curious. He knew that she was risking her life, and maybe he's thinking, why is my wife up in here? She's always been respectful. Something must be going on. There must be something huge that she wants to talk to me about. So perhaps he was curious as to why she had appeared. So he holds out the golden scepter, and then it says, then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. I want to know why, but I don't have any answers. Man, I've looked all over. I've looked at all kinds of commentaries. I want to know why she walked up and touched it. Nobody has any thoughts on this that I've been able to read as to why. Maybe just put yourself in her shoes. He holds out the grace. Maybe it's her acknowledging. She touches it because he bestowed grace on her. He's not going to have her killed, right? And so she touches it maybe as a thank you, if you will, as a thank you for the grace that you're giving me, perhaps. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And I'll look at verse 3. And the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom." Let me give you a little bit of background on that phrase, to the half of my kingdom. This is a figure of speech. In no way is it literal. It just means he would give anything within reason. King Herod later says this to his stepdaughter in the New Testament, who asked him to kill John the Baptist. And so he served John the Baptist's head on a silver platter. He murdered him, you remember, in the New Testament. Jesus got away by himself and mourned over that. It's just a phrase that many in royalty used. Extra biblical writings show that Ahasuerus, the same king that we're talking about here, had extended this offer on a couple of occasions before. Once to a woman, his mistress, who had asked for a robe that his wife had made for him, and he gave it to his mistress. Next thing you know, his wife learns of the affair and has the mistress murdered. This is a previous wife of this very king we're talking about. And so this phrase, if you're wondering why Esther doesn't say, "How sure, I'll take half the kingdom," right? It's just a figure of speech. It's a figure of speech that actually originated with Assyrian kings. And you look at Assyrian literature, and it says that when an Assyrian king allegedly, they would offer half of the kingdom. One king in particular, it started this way. He offered half of his kingdom if anybody could bring a cure to his son who had a deathly disease. And we don't know what it was. And so maybe he meant it in that moment. Hey, I'll give you half of my kingdom if you heal my son. But from that point on, kings had been known to use it for many hundreds of years. It spanned over a couple thousand years here, even into the New Testament, where they would say, "I'll give you half of my kingdom." In other words, you've got a big request. Let me see what I can do. Hit me with it. You know, what do you have? Up to half of my kingdom. Verse 4, and Esther said, this is her response, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." The name, check this out, the name of God, Yahweh in the Old Testament. In the Hebrew, they didn't use vowels. And so the name of God is Yahweh, YHWH. Mankind has come along and added the vowels and tried to say it as we might say it. It would actually be like Yahweh if we were saying it correctly as a Jew. But the name of God, Old Testament, is spelled YHWH. And the name of God can be seen in this sentence that she says, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I prepared for the king." That's a lot of English words, but in the Hebrew, it's just a handful of words that if you take the first letter of each of those words, it spells out Yahweh. And so some Hebrew manuscripts of the Esther story will capitalize those letters to draw attention to the name Yahweh. They say, well, this one book doesn't have God's name in it, but it actually does if you read between the lines. And you see that in Esther's request to the king, she says, if you look, code-wise, it's a codec. You have to look at these letters and you see the name of Yahweh. And so we don't know if it's the author's intent. In fact, I'm 99% sure it probably wasn't. It's just happenstance. It's just mere coincidence. But I use this story to warn you to stay away from those who love to find codes in the Bible. It can happen. You've heard of the Da Vinci Code of years ago. That's another movie that I hope you've never seen. If you have, I hope you've laughed at it. But the Da Vinci Code in that book, I mean, it was the biggest hoopla about this. I mean, it's been around before that. It's still around. People reading between the lines and taking every so many letters through the Bible, and it's spelling out things. It's always in hindsight that you can spell out these things. And it's been proven that you can take a phone book, you can take any book written by almost any author and do the same thing and come up with codes that would hint back to realities that you now know in the present that you didn't know then. And so a lot of people try to use these cryptic codes and say, hey, let me tell you more about what the Bible is saying. I would say stay away from those codes that people tell you is in the Bible. You know, the word is plain. It's available. We don't need to read between the lines. Now, that's not to say that we don't study the context. We study the history of the times. There's extra biblical things that help us understand what the Bible says. And we do take the Bible's original languages to English so we can understand it as English speakers. So there's a lot going on in our studying of God's Word. But to get into the codes of the lettering and all that, I hope you stay away from that. Now, here, Esther, going back to this statement, she says, I want to invite you and Haman to this feast that I've prepared. Esther didn't want to let her ultimate request be known too quickly. She didn't just say to him right then, right there, oh, well, let me tell you about the plan to kill me and my people. Remember, they don't know that Esther's even Jewish at this point. So she didn't want to let the cat out of the bag, so to speak. She waited, and I believe it's because she's directed by God. Remember, she'd been praying for 3 days, nearly. She'd been praying and fasting, and so she knows not to just let it come out. She was wise indeed, this Esther was. She was a woman of faith. She had already prepared the feast. You notice that? She says, I've already prepared it. Because she was thinking that, hey, my request is going to be, hopefully, prayerfully, giving it to a sovereign God. The king's going to accept my request. Not only is he going to extend the scepter and give me grace, he's going to come out to my feast. It says it's a feast that she's already prepared because it wasn't in no short order. These kind of feasts for royalty would take a lot of preparation work. And so she's already prepared the feast, hoping that yes would happen, right? She had already prepared for rain. Who has seen, since we're talking about movies today, who's seen Facing the Giants? Hopefully everybody. That's a good one. If you haven't seen that one, it's a Christian film, Sherwood Pictures. Watch that one. But in that movie, they talk about two farmers. Both of them were praying for rain because they both needed crops badly, and they were both having a drought and bad finances, bad circumstances that year. So they're both preparing for rain, but if you remember in the analogy of that movie, one farmer went out and prepared for rain. They were both praying, but one went out and prepared. And he's got his field ready, and he got ready to plant because I think he did plant because he's hoping rain's going to come. The other farmer did nothing, but they were both praying, God sends your rain. Only one of them was ready to receive it, right? Here you've got Esther praying faithfully, fasting for 3 days, and she doesn't know what the answer ultimately will be when she goes to talk to her husband, the king, but she's already prepared the fast, just believing that God's going to move, right? So I think that's very cool and faithful of her. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly so that we may do as Esther has asked. That's cool news. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. So that's feast number 1. Don't get confused. There's several. The book of Esther has multiple feasts. Already, if you saw the first 2 chapters, you read about one. When the king was having his feast, when he sent Queen Vashti away. I think I alluded to her death last week. I don't think it's certain that she was killed, that queen. She was just banished. She was banished, Queen Vashti, and divorced, if you will, right? And so here he is with, having this feast. He's going to go to the feast. He says, bring Haman quickly so that we may do as Esther has asked. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, see, even all feast long, and this is hours and hours, Esther doesn't get into her request. She's still waiting, seeking God for direction, seeking God for the right time. And so after they were drinking wine, and the king said to Esther, what is your wish? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. He's in other words saying, I'm going to listen to this big thing that you've got something big weighing on you. I want to hear it. Verse 7, then Esther answered, my wish and my request is, if I have found favor, now she's going to be a little smooth here. She's not even going to give him. She's going to, my wish is, well, I'm not going to tell you my wish because I still want to get, let me get you to come back out a second time. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. So she's talking about another feast on the next day. So she just had them come to a feast, and he's saying to her, okay, Esther, we've had a good time at this feast. What is it? Well, sir, let me give you another feast, and I can tell you tomorrow. I will tell you tomorrow, right? So Esther invited them to a second feast the following day, wherein she vows to tell the king what she requests of him. She remains sensitive to God's leading, to his timing. So often we fail to do this. I'm talking about myself. Maybe I'm talking about you. So often we are impatient with God. We hate delays of any kind. Look at Esther as a role model here. I mean, she didn't just jump into it and jump at it and just spill the beans. She's faithful unto God, and she's patient with his timing and his leading, and she's waiting for the moment that I believe God's going to prod her and tell her, okay, Esther, this is the time that you talk to the king about this. But we hate delays, and we often do, what I believe Proverbs 19:2 alludes to. It says, says, desire without knowledge is not good. Whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way. How many times have you or I missed our way? Spiritually speaking, even doing something that maybe God's called us to do because we've jumped the gun and we've not rested in Him, we've not looked to Him, we've not patiently waited on Him because we're people of now. We want everything now, right? In our day and age, we want it to happen just like we want it and when we want it, right? And so maybe, not just maybe, we definitely need to go back and be more like Esther in a number of ways, but especially in this way, to be patient and to wait on the Lord's timing just as she no doubt did. Look at verse 9. And Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. So here, imagine Haman. Put yourself in the shoes of this magnificent shark that we're tracking. He's enjoyed one royal feast, right? And now he's going to enjoy another one on the following day. And guess what? He's the only one invited who's not the king or the queen. And so this prime minister Haman, this shark who cares only about himself, is all about his power and his prestige, he's just eating this up. He's like, man, life doesn't get any better than this. He doesn't know what's coming. We, the reader, know. If you've read the story, you know what's coming. He doesn't know. This shark doesn't know. And so he thinks, man, his life is just great. He's got his genocidal murder plot coming to fruition, he thinks. He's got the king already made him second in command with the signet ring. He's got the king's authority. And now he's just having one feast after another with the royalty, right? And so he was glad. He was joyful and glad of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, so he's leaving to go home to brag to his wife and friends about all his success. When Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. See, Haman's happiness is circumstantial. It's based on honor and prestige that he garners from others. You see how he can be on top of the world in one moment, this shark, and then he sees one person? He's got the king and queen and a kingdom of people, perhaps, giving him prestige. And one person refuses to acknowledge him in the way he prefers. And it wrecks him. He becomes furious. I'll tell you, that's no way to live. Those of us, even as Christ followers, who sometimes get bogged down with living a life for worldly honor, that's no way to live, because worldly honor comes and goes. It is fleeting. Who's the gymnast? The black girl, Simone Bowles, or am I saying it right? Biles. And so a lot of people are upset with her decision. You know, who cares? If I was her counsel, I'd say, Simone, do what's good for you and what's right. Who cares about keeping some prestige of worldly honor if you feel like you need to exit this program at this time, right? And so Haman is a shark, all about himself, all about prestige, all about power. He wants it, and one person won't give it to him. And so it says he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. Check this. Zeresh, that name in the Hebrew, means disheveled head or shaggy head. He married him a shaggy head lady. And so he and his wife Zeresh, and look at verse 11. And Haman, says, and Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches. This is why he was wanting to run home and brag to them anyhow. He's talking about the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Then Haman said, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she prepared, and tomorrow also I'm invited by her with the king. He's like, here's feast number 2. Yet all this, check this, he even announces this to his wife and friends. Yet all of this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. See, Haman was so full of himself that he could have wild success and plenty of reason to be happy, more than almost everybody, save the king above him, right? But one person could rain on his prideful parade. One person. Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Verse 14, then his wife Zeresh and all of his friends said to him. In other words, they didn't say it in unison like some chorus. It just means that they were talking together and they all agreed together. In talking, they agreed together this sentiment to him. They said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king, Because, see, it's assumed that Haman has risen so high in the ranks, he can influence the king, if not just boss him around. Just tell the king, says his wife and good friends. Tell him to take out this Mordecai. Tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. And so this enormous height, this 75 feet actually, 50 cubits, is 75 feet, or what is that, 25 yards, a fourth of a football field high. He's going to make a public spectacle of Mordecai. It's higher than the gallows that was used in chapter 2 to kill the would-be assassins that we'll talk about here in another moment. It exemplified Haman's rage, right? He's so mad against that one person because it's all about him. The one person, like that queen in those stories that we would read as kids, the queen that would sleep on the top mattress, and she's got all these mattresses, but there's one little pea under that bottom mattress, and she felt it and hated it, right? And so he's the prime minister who has got one person in the whole kingdom that he just can't stand. And so he's so mad, he's going to build a gallows and make a public spectacle. He plans to personally have Mordecai murdered. And there's no talk or desire even then about ending the demise of all Jews. That's still in full force. But right now, quickly enough, he wants to have Mordecai murdered. Tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. This idea, it says, pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. Haman had the gallows made. This is true irony. A lot of people use the word irony totally incorrectly, but this is true irony. Because here he expects this gallows to be used for one purpose. And it's so going to backfire on him. It's going to be used for another purpose. And I'm going to save the ending. I don't want any spoiler alerts here in case you haven't got there yet in this story. But he has this gallows made. Chapter 6. By the way, I could just keep going and going. So we got a few more minutes here. Let's try to do chapter 6 tonight real quick. On that night the king could not sleep. This is not mere chance that he couldn't sleep. The king gets some royal insomnia because this is God working, right? You're going to see what plays out here. The king isn't going to be able to sleep this particular night, and this God doing this. And he gave orders, the king did, to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And so perhaps the king liked hearing about his own affairs. That's what these logs were. Many kings prior to him would keep logs of their reign and important events, battles and court affairs, big happenings. And so we're about to read of one. If you didn't read chapters 1 and 2, it's going to harken back to something that happened in chapters 1 and 2 here. He wants it read to him because the king's a little Haman. He's a little, little compared to Haman, a megalomaniac, egocentric, and he likes hearing about himself. And so he's can't count sheep, perhaps, so he's going to have one of his servants read the logs to him so he can fade off to sleep as they read about his exploits, right? And so it was found written, look at verse 2, found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor or distinction has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this? Now, do you remember this? If you've read chapters 1 and 2, and I hope you have, because I asked you to read that before we started last week, Mordecai overhears this plot and saves the king's life. He didn't do it for clout. He didn't then go before the king and say, hey, king, I did this. He didn't expect anything. Again, Mordecai, a little man, is in two ways. He's not only a little man physically, they named him that, but he's humbly. He's not about himself. He's the opposite of Shark Haman, right? And so the king is just now learning this, and Persian kings prided themselves on rewarding well those who contributed to their kingdom in big ways. And so for Xerxes, for this King Ahasuerus, this was big because it was his life on the line. And so the king says, what's been done? What honor has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this? And so the king's young men who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. They're probably flipping through the logs. King, it looks like we didn't do anything for good old Mordecai when he spared your life potentially, right? Verse 4, and the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So it's probably very early morning here, right? Because the king couldn't sleep. He had insomnia, so it's, who knows? Who knows at what hour, but it's in the middle of the night. It could be 3, 4 in the morning when the king is having some of his logs read to him, and then he stumbles upon, they start to read this story about Mordecai saving his life, and he's like, is anybody in the court? Because I want to take care of this right now. And in the court had walked in, not coincidentally, but divinely planned, Haman had walked in there, And it looks like we can surmise that Haman had perhaps arrived this early for two reasons. Haman may have not got any sleep himself, right? Maybe he hadn't slept all night either. We don't know. But he's upset about that one person, right? You know, he wants to end Mordecai, and he's excited perhaps about getting to the king and telling the king, hey, let's take down Mordecai tomorrow or as soon as possible, right? And so he's in the court. It says here plainly he wants to petition the king to get him to get Mordecai on those gallows. Verse 5, and the king's young men told him, Haman's there standing in the court, and the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what should be done? So check this out. Haman comes in, and can you imagine the shark, the magnificent shark comes in as proud and arrogant and boastful. He's had a great couple of days, right? And he comes in, he's like, he's probably taking a breath because he wants to immediately say, oh, king, let's hang this Mordecai. But before he can, the king cuts him off and begins to question him. And Haman said, the king says, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? So he stops Haman in mid-breath, really. And Haman didn't get to petition the king. He was probably surprised at this, but then the king was seeking wisdom from Haman, his number two, his top leader. So this was very understandable. So Haman would have expected that the king would petition him for wisdom. So he says, what should we do to honor someone that the king delights in? And Haman said to himself, whom should the king delight to honor more than me? See, Haman, that shark, is full of himself. He thinks the king is showing his hand here. He thinks that he's one up the king, that the king is trying to be clever. Hey, I want to honor somebody. What should we do? But he thinks he figures it out. He thinks it's him that the king wants to honor. But he plays clueless and tells the king what he should do. He's going to say to the king, oh, king, this is what we should do, right? So Haman said to the king, verse 7, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought. In other words, check this. In other words, treat that man like he is king. Let him be clothed as a king. Robes with which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden. That's more so telling than just royal clothes. Somebody come into an area with a horse with the king's image between the ears of that horse, that is speaking, hey, the king is in town, the king has arrived. He says, let this person get king's clothes and have the horse that the king has ridden. And on the horse's head, a royal crown. That's what I was alluding to there. The crown is set on that horse to announce to everybody, hey, it's like a king is upon us, right? And verse 9, let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse. All these are things that happen to the king. The king just stands there and people dress him. Everything that he's painting here, this picture Haman is saying, king, this, you know what I'm talking about, O king, because this happens to you almost every day. Let this happen to the man that you want to honor. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor. Let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So Haman was painting a picture of royalty, and he was painting a picture of royalty on public display. Power and prestige is what he was all about. Look at verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to, here it comes, Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned. Haman must be shell-shocked. So humiliating for Haman. He was trying to set himself up, but he made things worse for himself here. He would be the most noble official. He would be the one to do to his enemy what he thought the king would do to him. When he was saying, let the most noble official do this, and he thought it was him, the only one above him was the king. So he thought the king would dress him. He thought the king would put him on the king's horse, and the king would go out before him, Haman, and say, look what I'm doing to honor this man. But now Haman, the second in command, is going to have to do this for Mordecai. It just blew up in Haman's face. And so not that I feel sorry for Haman at all, but I do liken him in this instance to Wile E. Coyote, who has masterful plans. You've seen the old cartoon, right? He's going to get, his goal is to snag the Roadrunner. He wasn't looking for prestige. He wasn't, a shark person. He wants the Roadrunner, and he would come up with just grand things that would just circle back literally and pound him in the dirt. And so here Haman is just producing. He's concocting. He's got his own plans in full force, and now he's going to be made, his Roadrunner, if you will, is to just be given the utmost prestige and power. and it's just going to circle back on him and take him out, right? And so, verse 11. The king just got finished saying in verse 10, let nothing that you just said, let nothing be left out. Verse 11, I don't know how Haman did this. It says, Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Ha ha! That is, and so now in front of everybody, I mean, he knows, check this out, Mordecai ain't going to die. Because he's taking Mordecai through the streets saying, hey, y'all look at me. I'm the one announcing this. Mordecai is the king's man. Mordecai is being honored by the king. He's the one having to say this. They say that sharks can't swim backward. I looked it up this week and learned that that's almost always true. Sharks can even get caught into circumstances where they swim into something that's just narrow enough for their body, and then they get stuck because they can't maneuver. They can't navigate backward. Sharks can't swim backward. It's impossible. They can only go forward. They can only go for what they want. They can only go for what they're wanting to eat next, what they're going to bite into. And here Haman, a human shark, had to do the impossible. He had to swim backward. He had to drop his plans and honor the very man that he's trying to kill. He had to swim backward. He had to do the impossible for him and promote Mordecai. It was backward, it was opposed to his plan, but he had to do it, and it was poetic justice. Pride goes before the fall, Proverbs 16:18. And Haman lives that story well. Verse 12, then Mordecai returned to the king's gate. See, check this. Nothing about nothing about Mordecai changed. He went right back to the king's gate. Life was just back to normal for him. He didn't eat this up and revel in the prestige because, again, little man, Mordecai, is indeed a little man in the right ways, humbly, right? This show, this pomp and circumstance wasn't his desire. It was everything Haman wanted. It's not what he desired. I doubt he even ate it up. In fact, we can't know for sure, but he might have begrudged it. He might have been rolling his eyes thinking, oh, really? He might have been a little happy, I don't know if happy is the word, but to see his arch enemy Haman being the one to have to yell out, this is the man that the king is honoring. But aside from that, he might have been uncomfortable by the whole thing. And he goes right back to where he hangs out. He goes back to the king's gate. Everything is back to normal for good old Mordecai. But Haman hurried to his house. This time he went there not as happy-go-lucky as he had before. Not to go there and brag, but he goes there mourning and with his head covered. This was publicly symbolizing his grief. Here the tables have turned. The tables have totally turned. Mordecai last showed his grief publicly when he was lamenting about what Haman was going to do to the Jewish people. But now the tables have turned, and now you see the second in command. You see the shark, magnificent shark, Haman. He's the one that's publicly lamenting and covering himself, mourning with his head covered. In verse 13, Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends and everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife, once again, they're giving him wise counsel. Listen to what they say to him. They said to him, and they all agreed, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, because they've learned that he is. They know he is. They're like, hey, dude, hey, husband, hey, good friend of ours. If Mordecai, this man that you just had to go and announce to everybody is the king's honored person, if he's one of these Jewish people that you're trying to kill, and he is, then you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. Even Haman's wife and friends begin to realize that there's a divine plan in place. And they spoke wisely here. They gave the truth to Haman. They're like, hey, there's something going on here. God's behind the scenes here. God's in the works here. The Jewish people are, they're going to prevail again. And that was the sentiment probably coming from Zeresh and the friends of Haman. We're going to go just a little bit further and end in like just a couple of minutes. Verse 14. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. And this is probably in the afternoon of that day, because a lot of things were slated to happen later that day. For one, like he wanted Mordecai to die on the gallows later that day, right? But this is in the afternoon time. The feast is going to begin. And so just a few verses in, we're going to go to verse 6 of chapter 7 and be done. Chapter 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman went into the feast with Queen Esther, and on the second day as they were drinking wine after the feast, means Haman knows nothing about Esther's plan. He knows his plot to destroy Mordecai, and maybe his plot to destroy all Jews is probably going to be delayed in light of recent events, but he still knows nothing about what Esther's up to here. He knows he's suffered a major humiliation, but perhaps still in his mind, dining with the king and queen a second day in a row will still lift his spirits. He's thinking this is going to be a pleasant affair at least, right? And so they're drinking, and after they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." The Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request, for we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been merely sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss of the king." Y'all, Esther is a brilliant, just so clever with her words. She's so wise and clever. Just a few quick things before we dismiss with how she brought this before the king. Number one, she's waited patiently for the right moment, as she no doubt has been led by God. Let's do that as well. Number two, she's cleverly using her words in a way that wouldn't give away and thereby solicit Haman to try stopping her abruptly before finishing. She didn't open up with saying, "By the way, I'm Jewish and my people are on the line." Look at how she words everything so that she can get it all out before Haman tries to interject and stop her. And so she's identifying herself with her people's fate, not with their name. She didn't say, "Hey, I'm Jewish and my head's on the line here. My people's head's on the line." She says this plea to the king that she knows is going to stir the king. She knows it's going to, bring him to maybe want to do something, and she says it in a beautiful and perfect way. Number three, she spoke of the grave danger. This was a life and death matter, and so she had to get the king's attention. She says, "I and my people will be destroyed, killed, annihilated 3 times over." In this, in her remarks, she says, we're at a loss here. And then fourthly, she remained humble. "We would have been all right as your slaves," she said, "if that had been the only thing on the line. I wouldn't have spoken up if that was the gist of it all, O king, if me and my people would have just been your slaves forever. But we're talking about genocide here, not slavery. We're talking about life and death." So now maybe the king understands why she risked her life earlier. Now he hears. And when she says we've been sold, that was to hearken back to Haman saying to the king, because she learned of this, remember, that he's going to give all this money, all these silver, puts all this silver into the king's treasury if he'll accept his bribe and give him the signet rings, that he can go out and murder all the Jews. And so she just says it so beautifully and perfectly. I don't know if Esther was just a great orator. She could have been. She could have been a fast thinker. She could have been so clever, and she could have just been able to use words so perfectly. But maybe she wasn't. Most of us are not. And yet, God allowed her in that moment, as she waited patiently on Him, to say the right words. We have assurances of that in the New Testament, that when we're called before the carpet, especially for honoring Christ and we're being persecuted, that He will give us the words to say in those moments. And so you don't have to be maybe as clever and as sharp and as wise as was Esther for God to use you. You can just be dependent on Him as was Esther. We can all look to Him and trust Him and be faithful, and even in delay, even as we're patiently waiting on Him to lead us. That's what Esther did, and so she's able to use these kind of words. Verse 5, "Then King Ahasuerus said to the Queen Esther, 'Who is he? And where is he? Who has dared to do this?'" And that phrase, "dared to do this," in other words, in the Hebrew it means who has been filled in their heart with such a dastardly plan. It's what the king said. Who is so shark-like, Esther? Who is out there getting ready to do this? Because he's still oblivious. He hasn't put the pieces together to know yet what she's talking about. Which harkens back to the fact that I think when Haman influenced him for the signet ring, that this king was pretty much oblivious and he wasn't really giving much thought to it. Sure, go do this, Haman. Do whatever. Kill these people. Whatever. It's like it's not even on his mind here. In verse 6, "And Esther said, 'A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman.'" Here's the shark. Here's the wicked man that's sold me and my people and wants to kill us all. Then, because, by the way, the whole story's out. The cat's out of the bag. Haman can't stifle it. He can't stop it. It's done. Haman, I don't see how he doesn't have a heart attack here. It says, then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The shark is no longer the hunter, but now the hunted. Just when Haman thought his day couldn't get any worse, it sure enough did, right? It got as bad as can be. So next week, we're going to look at this. The shark goes down. Better than shooting an air tank in its mouth. If you watch Jaws, they put an air tank in his mouth. They had to shoot it and blow it out. Hey, Haman's going to go down in a much, much better way than any Jaws movie, right? We're going to see it next week very quickly. Angela, can I have 2 minutes? Y'all, 2 minutes? I mean, we're right on the line here. 7:30, 2 minutes to pray, and then we're out. So Angela's going to play. Will you bow your heads even now? Bow your heads as I want to pray about a couple of things. Can you say this if you mean it unto the Lord? Say this. Say, God, thank you for allowing me to boldly approach your throne. Thanks for always extending your royal scepter of grace to me. She was fearful to approach her husband, her king, the Persian king Xerxes. She had to put her life on the line. Aren't you just ecstatic as one who belongs to God, your Father? We're all princes and princesses, royally speaking, divinely speaking, as co-heirs with Christ. He is our Father. And He tells us to come before His throne boldly. No fear. Thank Him for that. Thank Him that we can go to Him anytime. And His royal scepter of grace is always extended to me. It's always extended to you. To find, it says in Hebrews, to find help and grace in our time of need. That's outstanding. So if you do nothing else tonight, thank your Father for that. Spend a moment thanking Him for that. Hebrews 4:16, let us then with confidence, no fear, no bravery is needed. Let us with confidence draw near to the throne, God's royal throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. We can approach Him anytime. Secondly, if you will, say, God, help me to be like Esther when needed. Help me to be brave. Help me to trust you in your sovereignty. And remember, brave doesn't mean that fear isn't there. It means you do the right thing in place of fear, in the face of fear. Say, God, help me to be like Esther, patient and following your leading every step of the way. Thirdly, say, God, help me to be unfazed by man's praise, by mankind's heaping of prestige upon me when that happens. Help me to be as Mordecai was. Help us all to be like that, to be little men, little women of God who humbly serve a big God. It's okay to be praised. It's okay to have people compliment us and to honor us. It's okay to even let that make you feel good. I can show you in the New Testament scriptures where that happens, and we are told to honor one another and give each other praises in that ways. It says, don't let your own lips praise you, but let the lips of others praise you. Don't seek the greatest seat of honor. In the book of James, it says at a banquet, you go to the last seat, have somebody else honor you. So there's permissions for us as humans to have others honor us and praise us for things that they like and enjoy and good things, and we can feel good about that to some degree, but it shouldn't be what we crave. It shouldn't be what we desire. It shouldn't be what we long for, what makes us prestige and power. Our name as far as being known by others, our fame and prestige shouldn't be what we're about. We should be little men, little women. We should be Mordecai's under God, humbly serving Him as a big God. So if you need to, here's my last appeal before we close it here. Say, God, forgive me for being selfish, for being prideful. Forgive me maybe for plotting selfishly and pridefully my own success instead of humbly looking to you. Here's the last scripture I want to give you, and just let this reverberate in your heart and your spirit and your head as you pray here. 1 Peter 5:6 says, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God so that at the proper time He may exalt you. Let's all do that. Let's be humble, little men, little women, under His mighty hand. That even when we are praised, even when prestige comes our way, we hearken it back to Him. We toss it back to Him. We point it to Him. Don't you love that when you see people of renowned, incredible folks, athletes, powerful figures, politicians, powerful speakers, pastors on TV and the books and all that. They have any honoring at all, and they point it back to their Maker, their Creator, their Father. Let's be those who do that. God, we thank you for the challenges that you've given us in tonight's part 2 of this Sharps of the Bible series. God, we ask you to help us to honor your word, to walk out of here doers, not just hearers of your word. And we thank you for the blessings that come to those and others around us as we do just that. We love you and praise you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Y'all, thank you for your graces, for giving me just a couple of moments of leeway time going past 7:30. My last announcement to you before you dismiss, if you enjoyed any of the delicious food, I mean, we're talking about the shrimp or the bread from Red Lobster or the salad, y'all, it cost a pretty penny from the church budget. And if we want to do this as often as possible, I need you to go drop, each one of you, each person who partook, if you'll drop a few dollars or more for you and your family members, maybe a few dollars a person, would really help offset the cost. And so my goal is if the church, we spend $50+ a week, but we're talking about a couple $100 even tonight. And I didn't charge anybody. And so if you'll just drop some money in that little drop box back there, that would just help. And if I see that tonight was a success and the money issue is not a big deal, then we can do these more where you don't have to order and you can just come and drop some and you can just partake. And we'll have more. Hopefully we'll do something bigger and better next week in the fellowship hall. Can't wait to see you Sunday. You're dismissed. Thanks.
Through these fires, 'cause you're walking with me. I'm changed by your mercy, covered by your peace. I'm living out the victory. Doesn't mean I won't feel the heat. You've walked me through fires, pulled me from flames. If you